Okay, so now that we've done introductions, there's a few things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to highlight the types of security incidents that you can expect to encounter, how to create or evaluate your existing incident response plan, and then we'll add the other considerations that you need to look at when developing your incident response plan. So for the overview, there's a couple items that we want to talk about. Incident identification, what your reporting requirements are, determining the status and severity of a security incident, what the containment steps look like, including evidence preservation, short and long-term containment, eradication, recovery, and then lessons learned. An often overlooked step that is one of the most important ones on there.
So to jump in, just add a couple things. Is this working? No? Okay. I'll just speak louder. So the overview here, you'll note as we go through that this tracks somewhat with a typical incident response plan. And one thing that I think is different perhaps about this, the scope of our presentation that I hope becomes evident as we go through, is that we're specifically tying all of this to an incident response plan, to a written incident response plan that we hope that all businesses have, or if they don't have it, install. And if you have one but haven't looked at it and aren't sure whether these line up, that you pull it out of the drawer, update it, think about whether maybe it needs some updating, maybe it needs some tweaks. But so one of the discussion points as we were preparing for this was just that we've done a lot of these, or we've seen a lot of these that focus just on the incident itself, and everybody's running around like chickens with their heads cut off, and it's very fast-paced. And what I see often is question number one: do we have a plan? Are we following a plan? Where are we at in that? What's going on? And there's just lack of guidance in a lot of cases, and that's why the focus on the plan is there. So just for some context.
Yeah, and you'll notice throughout that we're always going to basically bring it back to these steps. This is the common language and the core steps for incident response. It's always going to be, at least in our presentation and in the documentation that we'll provide you with that. Afterwards, it's always going to be identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and then lessons learned. So let's talk about a couple common incident types. So we're just going to start with the big one. We're not going to go in the order of the smallest incident to, we'll just start with ransomware, one that everyone is familiar with, but Kevin, why don't you go ahead and give us an idea of what ransomware looks like currently?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I'm sure many of you have seen a lot of things that have been going on in the news as of late. Ransomware is up. I've watched the trends. So in 2017, it started accounted for about 5% of attacks. Progressed over the course of that time, has moved up to roughly 20%. So it's doubled over the course of years after years after years, and it's continued to be the most popular attack. So pretty much, if I took an analogy, ransomware is like holding your critical systems or your crown jewels within your organization hostage until you pay them. It's organized extortion. It's computer extortion, more or less. It's damaging not only to your reputation, but to your environment. I mean, you can imagine coming in and all of your files are encrypted, you can't get to them, and you've got millions of dollars holding on the table for something that you can't get access to, right? They're gonna rob you, they're gonna extort from you, they're gonna take the money into cryptocurrency, and it's hard to track without proper planning and other processes to get into.
So we all, at least all three of us, know that ransomware, and most of you probably as well know that it's changed over the years. Whereas we started with the threat actors would encrypt the files on your local systems, that's not the only thing they do anymore. Now they are also taking your files and threatening to make a public disclosure of those files. Taylor, can you speak to what that looks like in a business?
Yeah, it is interesting. I can recall 10 years ago, you jump on an incident, you get the call, it's ransomware, say, oh, well, okay, this is bad, quite bad, but perhaps on the legal side of things, as the legal expert on the issue, we just need to get the business back up and running. Like that is priority number one. I will assist as needed, but it was nearly unheard of, at least in my world. And so I didn't see that many of these. We knew that they were out there, but folks caught wind that they're just legal issue-wise often wasn't quite as much. There wasn't notification of individuals necessarily. Now, it's somewhere in between there and now. The rise of exfiltration of information in the middle of this incident, when it turns out to be ransomware, has just exploded. There was a time in the middle where there was this sort of open question: if there's usually no exfiltration, and we have forensics come in, and it looks like things are pretty okay, and maybe there's not a threat that we're going to release all your information, and no evidence necessarily of compromise of maybe some personal information, we might be in a pretty good spot from a legal position, thinking about, do we need to publicly disclose, do we need to talk to our clients about this? Now, I would say that we're sort of just flipped on our head from where it used to be. I go into ransomware situations assuming that, at least on the table, is a distinct possibility that there's more than just locking up the system and asking for money in order to restore it. Through that process, there's several steps. We'll go through some of the steps here. But through that process, there is a level of kind of vetting exactly what's going on. There's some ransomware is super unique in that you're potentially in contact with the person who's doing this to you, because yes, they're demanding money, but also there's sort of just an open line of communication in a very unusual way. Raises a bunch of legal issues. For example, should you be paying criminals? Are they on a list that makes it illegal to pay them, for example? Are they a nation-state actor? Variety of legal issues that arise, but it's very interesting and also mostly kind of just scary to see the direction that ransomware has gone. And for me, it's shifted from probably every once in a while something that comes into most of, at this moment, I would even say, if not, maybe not most, but a pretty high percentage of the data security incidents that come across my desk now.
If I can add one more thing, and I don't think I clarified. From where it was just a one-on-one attack originally, right? Where it has progressed to now, it usually takes 3 to 4 attack vectors now. So not only they're locking up your information, but they've already copied it to another location. They'll turn around and they might say, if you pay me $1 million, I'll release it. But then they'll come right back and say, okay, I need another $2 million, not to share the fact that I have all of this information. Not only that, the cost of repair, identity theft. Say if you have PHI or PII, and I know we've just heard about 312,000 hit PHI stolen from an organization within the last few weeks. Imagine they go out to those clients, right? And they're out there trying to say, okay, I have your data, now you're exposed, and it's your fault, and you have to pay for whatever they loot. So it becomes even more of a threat to your organization's bottom line, your finances, not to have something in place for that eventuality, because everyone is getting attacked and it's just growing. Now we have AI. What's AI going to do when they're creating all these different codes and getting even better at taking your information and hiding it in other locations? It's just going to keep getting worse and worse.
So I think we've talked a little bit about how the threat actors are now going to encrypt your local files, They're going to threaten to disclose that information. But the newest term that we've seen probably in the last, I guess, year would be groups that will also then hold your infrastructure as a service or your software as a service applications hostage, whether through DOS or a distributed denial of service attack. We've seen in multiple negotiations over the last year that becomes one of the critical components that an attorney or a digital forensics team or even the CSERT is working on, which is getting the threat actor to stop the attack. It's become pretty much step one. We need to deal with getting them to stop their activities before we can move on to recovery. One group that's known for doing this is a relatively popular group at the moment. The name that they're frequently called is Black Hat. They like to do all three of the things we've discussed. And the annoying thing about them is that they are a ransomware as a service. So what they do is they have an affiliate program. So if you are an inspiring criminal and you want to get into ransomware and have the right resources, you can communicate with them and become an affiliate of theirs. You can determine what your own attack vectors are going to be, and then you can be paid out if the ransomed organization cooperates. What kind of challenges do you see this causing for organizations from a compliance and legal perspective?
Oh gosh. I'm sorry, I can't help but laugh. I've seen a movie like this recently. So think about ransomware as a service. Essentially, like he said, it's a brokerage house for those who have been exploited in the past, right? You may not even know your information's out there, but they're upfront. They'll be the ones that reach out to you, but somebody else has access into your information. And it's just wholesale terrorism of a cyber scale, right? From a compliance standpoint, I like to specialize in data privacy, right? So understanding the depth of your information and where it's at, there's so many different regulatory aspects. If someone from the EU's information is compromised, now you're dealing with GDPR, Canada, Cybersecurity Canada, and other regulations, and the reporting that has to go with it. And now, through organizations like this, you got to remember there's an executive order where we have to share information about these types of attacks, right? Within our breach notification procedures, FBI has to be called, insurance company, all of that has to be kept close in hand to help you deal with these. The forensic side is the only way that we can trace those back. But if you don't have a plan in place, you'll forget to maintain what we call the chain of custody when this happens, making sure that every I is dotted, every T is crossed. You have a full documentation list and chain of custody, how I pass to the next person in hand to help you address these kind of issues.
I'll just note that the ransomware as a service model has created, in some ways, it's almost made it easier to respond to some of these incidents, only in that there's essentially public information now about the threat actor that's on the other side of things, and it's the such significant rise in this method of attack has created a situation where, several years ago, we had no idea who these people were. We didn't know what their motives were, other than, probably to get some money out of this. Now, we run into ransomware, we identify, maybe the type that we're talking about, or the group perhaps who is typically behind it. And we actually have a lot of information about the people on the other side of things. We know typically how they negotiate. Perhaps, we're talking through things in an attempt to resolve things on our end and kind of play this out. And we will know in many cases, these guys play no games. They will not respond well to certain tactics, whereas others are very much willing to kind of hem and haw essentially. You end up with some communications back and forth. They're willing to talk things through with you, and there's a level of we probably don't want to be engaging too much with criminals, but that can save some time if they're perhaps threatening to publicly disclose all of your information and trade secrets and etc. So although ransomware is a huge challenge, and I wouldn't even remotely want to say that it's not. It's interesting in that we now have just a ton of information because this is just so prevalent. Which can, if you're bringing in somebody or you have somebody on your team who has this knowledge and experience, it can help to inform your reaction and your strategy going through the incident.
So Taylor, I'm a business of 200 people, and I have ransomware, but I have great backups, planning on restoring from backups. They're threatening to release my data, and I want to reach out to the threat actor myself. Thoughts?
Probably don't, or at least make sure you have a team of experts, hopefully behind you, folks who've done this before and are coaching you through that. If you might be the one doing it, we most often see and we would typically recommend that somebody not internal to the business be doing the very careful, strategic communication, if that's occurring at all. And in plenty of these, there is not much communication. Communication often arises out of a need and a strategic need to kind of, let's pace things out. They're saying they're going to release all of our information within 3 days. It's probably not the case if you have somebody who knows the actors on the other end, who understands and has some experience with them. They can probably help kind of pace this out a little bit more and buy us some time. But to engage directly with criminals, if you had an actual ongoing hostage situation, you wouldn't be yourself speaking with the person taking a person hostage. Same thing with your data is really the recommendation.
So do either of you think that having someone that has a background or works for a digital forensics firm or an attorney reaching out buys you additional credibility with the threat actors?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you think about it, most threat actors assume that you're helpless, defenseless. That's the reason why they're going after your organization in the first place, or at least they figure they can get in, right? If you don't have a professional that is experienced enough to know different attack vectors associated with this, maybe even see the code that's being used against you to make a decision or use their expertise to analyze the situation in a way that you can and prepare you in those 2 or 3 days that you may have before you have to pay, you're taking a huge chance. It's better to be prepared in having, like you said, communications with your internal team, knowing who your stakeholders are going to be. And we're going to get into this as we build out an incident response plan. But first things first, take a measured approach to your response. Make sure you're effectively looking at the entire situation, the attack vector, meaning internal and external, where they could have taken your information, what information they got, how valuable that information is to you, what does your backup looks like. Do you have a way of dismantling that system and starting over? What's your recovery time objective? All of these things play into a part prior to your communicating to the threat actor, right? Understand your situation first before you reach out.
Okay, so we've talked about ransomware, which is the scariest one. Now we're going to talk about what I consider to be the most prevalent type of cybersecurity attack, the business email compromise. So you brought up earlier, Kevin, know where your data is. Can either one of you speak to how things have changed in regards to business email compromises with the prevalence of Microsoft 365 and Google's Office applications?
It's talk about a loaded question. I will just say that the moment we've confirmed whether it's a business email compromise or a related vector, whether it's on Office 365, something ancillary to that. I assume coming in anything in even relation to this that potentially all of our information is essentially up for grabs at this point. That potentially all of the information that the company has on file on its systems may have been compromised. That's like step one in my book, if we're talking business email compromise or anything analogous to it. Because from a legal perspective, the first, not the first issue that we run through in the incident, but the first kind of big legal moment in the incident response tends to be this developing understanding of what information was compromised, and is that going to cause us a requirement to notify our customers, employees, the public in general, state attorneys general, regulators, any number of a long litany of lists. And business email compromise is the one that both has the tendency to expand a lot over the course of an incident, has the potentiality of popping up also in the middle of other incidents that are ongoing, other incident types, and just changes a lot and tends to expand over the course of the incident, just in a bad way. So.
All right, let me just take a moment to connect the dots for something here, right? We just talked about ransomware. Understanding that business email compromise makes up 30% of the attack vector of successful ransomware attacks. Another 40% is made up of, and I read this in the 2022 Verizon Intel report, right?
That's my favorite one.
It also mentioned that 40% of successful ransomware come from desktop sharing apps, right? This is how they get into your environment. Once they get your credentials, they pretty much got the keys to your house and your car, right? They're ready to drive off, go into your garage and unload you, right? That's the whole purpose of getting your credentials. And it gets worse if you don't have multi-factor authentication set up. Now they have access to all of your data because they can get into your Microsoft environment. Single sign-on is a blessing and a curse. They can sign into your system and go all the way through your environment with little to no resistance based on getting your business email compromised. Additionally, you're exposing everybody else because now they have your entire contact list, all of the documents that you had in your email. So if we're sending sensitive documents, you can assume those are out. It's interconnected, if that makes sense.
So let me pose two scenarios to you, both of which I've seen within the last year. A company doing business, US company doing business in South Korea, and the South Korean manufacturer that the business was working with fell victim to a business email compromise where their global administrator account was taken over and they lost full control of their Microsoft 365. That was their only method for communicating with the vendor. And the vendor proceeded to get invoices paid for multiple months. What do you do if that's the scenario? If you're a manufacturer and your partner in a foreign country has now lost the ability to communicate with you while you continue to pay them tens of thousands of dollars over a series of months?
Yeah, business email compromise in a scenario like that, and in a variety that we've seen, especially increasingly, has sort of added these sort of tinges of what ransomware almost does to you, and that it also will affect your continuity of business. It will expose like really important, not only ability to communicate, but information that you might need. What if you need really detailed specifications that only lives in the system that's now down because we're trying to determine what the problem has been. And we're talking about continuing to pay. What if we shouldn't be continuing to pay this particular partner at that time because of any one of a variety of issues? We might have a problem receiving our goods from them or what have you. We've also seen sort of analogous, we've seen business email compromise that then leads to sort of payment fraud really rampant in that it's you just gave them, if the keys to the kingdom are all of your contacts because they're all of your customers who are all paying you on a regular recurring basis in a large amount, you can bet that a criminal who knows how to do this is going to go in and going to be able to easily figure that out, contact all of them, and then tell them, hey, we've got new payment information, please now direct your payments here. We might not realize that initially, right?
I'll just say this other thing. Since in my career, I've been in a lot of different career industry verticals, right? Understanding, say, logistics, the ability to get into your invoices, your bill of ladings, all of that. They can change the destination of your shipment and take major cargo away, right? They can make any number of changes to your internal procedures to say your accounting department completely starts giving out financial information based on an email they received from a senior executive. That these are the extenuating circumstances that can really impact your business. So I would watch out. I would emphasize the need for internal procedures related to changes to accounts, your vendor management program, all of that is one way to help you address a business email compromise.
So something we've talked about before would be a human multi-factor authentication. Can you make it so that one person in your organization cannot initiate and approve a wire transfer, things like that? What about from the other thing that we see happen? Let's say a human resources director ends up with a business email compromise. They take and send out phishing emails to all of that person's contacts. Now you have a person with access to sensitive information, but you have a TTP of a unsophisticated threat actor. Where do you go with legal?
Yeah, there's all of these, even, one thing I want to note before the legal is all of, whether it's ransomware, whether it's business email compromise, most of the attack vectors we're talking about here, there's a human element, right? There's a training element, did that person know whether to click on that link or not? And the vast majority of incidents that we see boil down to that, basically. And the problem with that, particularly in organizations of scaling sizes, is that it becomes a numbers game, right? It's like sales. It's like you have enough contacts. Eventually somebody is going to be the weak link and do this. So we can raise the waters a little bit and hopefully not click on the really obvious ones, and certainly do some training around that, but know that it's not inevitable, but you need to do a lot of training to at a certain point to get past diminishing returns. We haven't gotten to your question, but
No,
if you want to jump in, please go ahead.
No,
Because
continue.
if that raises something, go ahead.
No, I think if you want to continue on that line to cover it.
Sorry, it was gears turning in my head. But on the legal side of things, this raises a business email compromise where there's an internal actor. We've seen this happen a lot with like an HR person or what have you. Looks like, email comes in, it looks like it's from CEO, CFO, whoever. And inevitably, I swear, the employee, it's like Friday at 4 o'clock, or it's the employee's on vacation but trying to field emails and just keep things running, trying to do the right thing, and they make the mistake. It raises legal and just company, business, personal kind of decisions about how do we react to that. We've seen situations where...
I'll interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
So, if you're a CEO and this is a situation you're in, who are you using to determine what your liability is?
Yeah. So the question will ultimately be, did we have a standard procedure? Did we have a policy in place that would have told somebody whether to act this way, whether they should have, without multiple factors of authentication, changed who is paid and to what account? If we didn't, is it reasonable to, for example, come back to that employee and say it's that employee's fault? From a legal perspective, you're probably not in a great spot there. And then, of course, then the business is going to be even more concerned about, if there's a change of payment that's been triggered because of this. There's a concept of essentially like, does the email that came in, like, how convincing was it essentially? Was there apparent authority to make that change or make that, did the email seem legitimate? And right now, they're getting much better. These emails are not like broken English, I'm trying to give you, a kingdom in Africa or whatever. They're pretty sophisticated. And so a business on the other side that's saying, you didn't ship my goods, or you owe me money for the goods that I shipped you and you authorized, is going to be in a pretty good position unless you can demonstrate that the business has pretty relatively sophisticated internal controls, technical levels of controls, and would have been able to kind of spot this and prevent it, and it still got through.
So I'm a business, I do manufacturing, I have business email compromise. The threat actor sends out fake invoices to my customers. They get the money instead of me. As the person that was compromised, what's the likelihood that my clients are going to have to pay me again?
Yeah. So quite possible. It certainly is going to be, first of all, think about the fact that it's going to be just a huge headache considering the number of potential clients that you might have involved in this. But again, coming back to this apparent authority kind of concept, if on the customer's end it appeared legitimate and it wasn't from a really unusual email address, for example, so in the case of business email compromise, it's from an internal email saying please update your payment information or please whatever, and they're just following those instructions. How could they possibly know? That's what a court's going to ask. Who is in the better position to know, the correct facts here? And it's the internal business at the end of the day who could have, better protected their systems. In theory, is what a judge is going to say. Yeah. Question.
So, just a quick question from that standpoint: would it be prudent to have a policy that essentially says, in the same way that we don't change things internally without actual physical approval? You got to get me on the phone. You can't do this by email. Tell your clients in writing, don't ever change your payment information without speaking to someone via Teams or Zoom face to face.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Kevin, you even mentioned like a policy. I would say policy. I would also go even maybe another step and consider, think about, should this be baked into an agreement or at least a terms and conditions document that's provided to every customer. That's going to be even, that might give us an extra level of enforcement ability against the relationship there to say, look, yeah, understandable you received this and it looked really convincing and I feel for you, but we gave you this agreement and it says the only way that these changes will ever be made is if there's written notification and some sort of verbal, in-person, however it's worded in the agreement. We are now increasingly drafting terms and conditions and the like to include, reflect those concerns.
I was going to add a question for you. Okay.
So,
I think we had a question.
Oh,
well,
sorry.
Just go ahead. I'll wait.
The gentleman just brought up Teams as a method for validating. Why can't we use Teams for a method of validation anymore? Because what are threat actors going to do?
Yeah, you have a special little attack man in the middle, and your business email compromise now allows somebody else to get in on your Teams to validate that they have, hey, I'm here, send me a note. Hey, yeah, that was me. I've had that actually happen. Someone reached out to me via Teams and said, hey, listen, I'm out of town. It looked like it was the CEO's email. I'm out of town. I need you to go get me some gift cards for some company, right? And it's like, that doesn't make sense. So I just want to kind of circle back and make just a couple of 2 or 3 points. One, from a legal standpoint and regulatory standpoint, one, you need to understand what environment your company operates in from a regulatory compliance standpoint. You also need to know that due diligence is a big part of your protection, not just to say that you vetted out your entire program, but due diligence is what a judge would look to see, did you do the best you could to prevent this from happening long term? That can include your standard cybersecurity training, running your incident response plan, your tabletops, your continuity planning, breach notification, all of those things that go into a security program proves that you're a senior executive. If I was the CEO and I had to answer this, I'm like, you see my program, I've signed off on it, it says what we do. And to your point, we have a procedure that we work with different people about. We'll create a vendor management program. We'll also have a method where we sign an SLA on our agreement with our vendors to say if there's a change, only you have to make these 2 contacts, validate it through these 2 points of contact. You either call us, you send us this chain on our form and document, we turn around, we call you to validate, we get the information directly from you to make the changes via telephone and keep it moving. So.
I do think on the Teams piece too, if you get a video call going with somebody and you're going to that level,
That's what I was saying.
then you're probably in better shape. I mean, think about your
AI.
risks. Yeah, that's where my mind was going too, right? Because within the next short window, I mean, it's already here, but you can sort of read the tea leaves and look down the road and see where this is going, and see that it's not really going to be that difficult, and it already isn't, to replicate a voice or potentially even a video. But at the same time, you have to. There's a level of practicality in business here as well. If you jump on a video call right now with somebody and I see their face, what more are we going to do other than see them in person, and if they're somewhere else?
Yeah, I would also recommend, if you don't have an existing relationship with that person, to not use the
Right.
phone number that is in the email that you received,
Yes.
because we've seen them set up fake phone numbers in your area code just to receive those calls to try to validate those wire transfers. Did we answer your question?
Yeah, kind of 2 questions. Insurance, how does that kind of play into this? I mean, we've seen, even with some of the insurers that we've looked at, where they'll say, well, if we're going to insure you, you have to tighten up your procedures, et cetera. And that's even been helpful in saying, okay, what are we potentially missing, even if we're not going to go the insurance route, to kind of see what we need to tighten up. And then also, I mean, what do you recommend? This is probably a huge question. Just from a standpoint of, okay, there's a business email compromise. How do I know that we or our IT people or whomever it may be can detect that before it can detect it sooner rather than later? Are there systems or procedures you can have in place to realize when that happens versus when it actually gets acted upon by, if somebody gets in your email and doesn't use it for a while? Is there a way you can be aware of that, and systems you can have in place to prevent the use of some of that information?
So if you had asked me that question a year ago, I would have given you a more emphatic yes. But because threat actors are smart, they've changed their tactic for how they conduct BECs anymore. What they used to do was they used to wait till off business hours. A bot would test whether or not the credentials they had were valid. And then if they were, then a live threat actor would actually log in. They would create rules, look at the emails, all that process. Now, the way a BEC works is, if I get your credentials, I'm not going to wait until after hours. I'm going to hit that as many times during the middle of the day as possible in order to try to get you to hit the MFA button due to alert fatigue. So I'm going to try to trick you into thinking it's a valid MFA request so that I can bypass your MFA. That's the way it works now, and is much more common.
Is that something, I think of our IT provider, is there something they can put in place that says, okay, this was a request from Portland, we don't have operations in Portland, whenever there's something like that, a sign-on attempt from there, we're just going to shut it down? I mean, are there systems you can put in place for that or not?
Yeah, your best bet are to use what are called conditional access policies in Microsoft 365. You can get super granular with them. You can make it so if it's from an unknown address that they have to multi-factor authenticate. You still have the problem with alert fatigue to deal with, but it's a better system.
Yeah.
Where we've seen some both good and bad changes is threat actors know what conditional access policies are now. So they'll use things like US-based VPS services.
Yeah.
They'll use VPNs, and the most interesting one that we've seen in the last year was there was actually, I don't know if you're familiar with the website Code Academy. Well, it turns out that if you went and you put code into Code Academy, you could actually get it to make an outbound call, basically using their internet connection. So we saw business email compromises originating from Code Academy using their IDE. So if you had an account there, which was free, you could use it to make it look like your login came from Colorado, inside the United States. These guys have a lot of time to find ways around our systems. Your goal is always defense in depth, real-time monitoring, making sure you have good conditional access policies. There are also tools that say if this computer or this device has never registered before, again with CAP, make this much more strict as to what they have, the steps that they have to go through. Yeah.
I will say too, we have live security monitoring, and it has saved us several times with Convergence ASK monitoring.
So he's talking about solutions that basically take all of that log information, whether from Microsoft 365 or another source, and monitor them in real time. And security or incident responders are looking at them and validating them against the information they know about your environment. So, okay, if both logins from the United States, is it possible a person could travel from there to there? Is one of them a VPN? That type of thing. So there are mechanisms, but you're not going to be able to just use one anymore. We can't just use MFA. We need multiple policies, defense in depth stacked.
And on the, you mentioned insurance also. You absolutely can insure against these risks. Knowing that the policies here vary significantly is a really critical component, and so the recommendation here is really closely read the policy documents, have a deep understanding of what's actually covered, what's not covered. You can, depending on the business, I mean, there's also increasing discussion about whether these risks are actually insurable, and question whether in a number of years here that's going to continue to be a yes. That's an open question that's currently being discussed among industry experts and the like. But at present, for the most part, unless you're the huge, largest businesses in the world, you absolutely can get a policy that covers all the risks we're talking about here, but it's a matter of really understanding. I mean, all the way down to ransomware. The insurer might be willing to pay the ransom if you go in that direction and that's your only option and you don't have backups and et cetera. But it can be very helpful. Insurance can step in, assist with legal fees, assist with notification obligation, and the relationships with vendors needed to send out. If you need to send out hundreds of thousands of notifications in physical mail because that's what the law says you have to do, that might be a kind of a burden, right? It might be a bit expensive, might take some time. They can help with that. They can provide forensics assistance and referral. They just know, though, you mentioned there's a check and balance here. It doesn't give you free rein to stick your head in the sand as a business and just say, well, insurance will cover it, because like you said, they will be very interested in your level of security measures a lot. The other direction that we've seen those checks come in from is vendors and customers, contract partners, essentially. We've increasingly seen very serious contract negotiation discussions over how well are you taking care of the data that we provide to you, or our relationship that could be really ruined or problematic if there's a data security incident on the other side, and who's gonna be responsible for that.
It's worth it just for the fact that you get prioritization for CSERT and forensics, though I've never seen an incident where it went through insurance where they didn't have people available within 12 hours.
Yep.
And you may be waiting a lot longer if that relationship doesn't exist.
Yep. And the like minutes, every minute is just like so crucially important at the beginning of these. Just to know, you know, we should probably bump forward here, but like to stop the incident, like from being an ongoing active emergency to let's actually get to the recovery phases of this, like that is the most crucial. It's just, yeah, timing.
I think we can move on. I'll make this one easy on you. What are the compliance risks of having poor physical security?
Yeah, I think that's one of the underrated aspects of your security program is the physical security. That also entails, you know, not just your data closet, but your actual laptops and phones when you're out at the coffee shops. It also includes your entry and exit ways, right? Ingress and egress considerations are always super important. The ability for someone to tap into just a simple line or to look over your shoulder while you're on your computer doing something odd, right? Insider threat is also a portion of what you're looking at here from a security standpoint. There's a lot of things that you should consider about the environment, where you have enough cameras, enough policies in place, because a lot of times if we're smaller organizations, we may not have the ability to completely secure our environment the way you want to. We may be at home, your kids playing around or whatnot, you know, everybody's working from home. You still have to consider, you know, that environment as well for security purposes, right? How do you access that using a VPN? Is somebody standing outside your window and intercepting your traffic? This is all a very personal approach. So please keep that in mind as you secure it. Look everywhere, including physical security of your phones and things like that, because your MFA, people can clone your telephone if you're getting the text MFA, that can take you down.
If I can add just one last legal consideration, the intellectual property piece of this applies to virtually any type of data security incident, but is really crucial for some businesses, probably all businesses, but in particular, sectors of businesses that rely on trade secret protection. So, right, if you have intellectual property, there are a number of ways that you might protect it. You might have a patent, you might have a trademark, a copyright, some sort of formal protection that you've gone out and applied for. Some types of intellectual property aren't really ripe for that type of protection, and others are really just best protected through trade secret related laws and rules. And so classic trade secret, like a recipe, like KFC's herbs and spices and you know, Coke's recipe, all of that, the only way that you can continue to keep your trade secret protection is if you actually protect it and you keep it confidential. There's some allowance for the potentiality of somebody stealing it or misappropriating things, certainly. But if, for example, your trade secrets live on a part of your network that's relatively easily accessible or widely accessible within the organization, or if that recipe document sits in a desk drawer in an unlocked office and somebody breaks in and steals it, or breaks in electronically and steals it, there might be a question in the future, if that is then publicly disseminated, as to whether you have any trade secret protection whatsoever. So another like really crucial reason to be serious about this, particularly if that's a key component of your business.
So I'm a psychologist that sees patients and stores records on my laptop, and I've left it on the front seat of my car in a parking lot, and it has been stolen. What happens now?
We hope that you're familiar with HIPAA, and there will now be a number of questions raised as to how to proceed from a regulatory perspective. And some of those might involve some not so happy discussions, perhaps with whether they might be regulators in that space. You may need to notify patient or patients who might be involved. It's not going to be fun. It happens. Particularly in the healthcare space and HIPAA covered information, it's super prevalent. At least the pro with HIPAA is that there's sort of more of an enforcement of having kind of plans and procedures and protections in place. HIPAA tends to be one of the more teethier regulatory mechanisms out there among the various sectors that have regulated data privacy and security. So, but it won't be fun.
I actually have a lot of HIPAA clients, and so understanding that there are some reporting aspects, there's a lot that goes on into that one. Also, encryption and things like that. Some of the security requirements associated with HIPAA would make me wonder why he has all that information on his laptop. But hopefully, if he works with a team like mine, then he'll have the data encryption at rest. The BitLocker, we can lock it and brick your laptop by hitting a button, and hopefully that's all set in place. Then we have conversations, like we say, around the sanction policy related to HIPAA and the due diligence piece, so that that breach notification is required at a minimum 250 people. So if he has that many people on his laptop, there's probably going to be a disclosure if they don't have that there. So they're going to have that conversation and then talk about the costs associated with fixing that issue.
All right, so let's talk about what you need to do in order to create an incident response plan for your business. Just to start off, let's just talk about why a security incident for me may not be the same as a security incident for everyone else in the room.
So first things first, you have to define what an incident is for your particular company. Each industry is a little bit different. So even looking at the definition, there's several different definitions. HIPAA has a little bit different definition, but defining what an incident is for you, whether it's a security event, well, by definition, a security event that compromises the integrity, confidentiality, and availability of information assets, right? Defining what the asset is, defining what you need to maintain, and what constitutes an incident. If you're in the HIPAA space, it could be the loss of a record or information or unauthorized access to that. Somebody gets in your system and they're able to read a medical record they're not supposed to, or a patient comes in and taps on a computer and all of a sudden they can see someone else's information. That could be an incident. So you have to make sure first and foremost you define it before moving forward.
Yeah, so the question then varies considerably from business to business, organization to organization, and requires a very deep understanding of what information we have, and you'd be amazed the number of conversations I have with folks that have a pretty good sense, but over the course of the conversation we come to find that maybe we didn't have our arms around the full breadth of the types of information that we have, and minor differences here can make really big differences when it comes to an incident and a reporting obligation. So the question here tends to be very specific, both in terms of what you have, and then also who kind of is regulating or applying statutes to you, and may also be geographic. So we've mentioned a couple times GDPR. If we have a sufficient amount of information from individuals located in the European Union, and you don't know about GDPR, then we probably should have a conversation, because it is probably one of the most, if not the most, sophisticated, matured data privacy laws that also include some security aspects, as well as a variety of notification, data subject access rights. Essentially, somebody can come to you and say, I want all my information, or please help me correct this information that you have, or please help me give give all of my information to another business because I've asked you to, and that's an inherent right under GDPR. So having the point here, I guess, that I want to make though is just having a good sense and your arms around the information that we have and having kind of talked through that and how that flows into an incident response plan among other pieces is super important.
So to summarize what you're saying is that when I'm developing my incident response plan, like it says on the slide, I'm not using named incidents in order to determine what it is. I'm putting variables in like impacted systems, the data that was on the systems, what the impact is to the business overall, something more general because the risks change daily.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We don't want your incident response plan to be triggered or necessarily there may be impacts, but was a social security number included in the information in this incident? Eventually, that might be relevant. That probably will be relevant if it's a potentiality, but triggering the reason that this question is important is because it is sort of the beginning of the plan. If an incident is potentially occurring, here's what we do. And so knowing that there's an impact to systems is really the most important piece at this stage of the plan in most cases, so that we can move forward and then investigate it and understand it.
Yeah. Okay, so we do have some examples. They're relatively general, but these are all examples of potential types of security incidents. Let's give you an opportunity to cover some of them that you find to be more interesting.
You can look here too if you want. I know I have my glasses, I can't see.
So let's just.
So just to kind of think about it, incidents can come from a variety of locations and ways, right? When we start this process out by identifying what I call it a risk management program, what are the potential risks to your individual business? Is theft even a possibility with what you're doing? And we're not just talking about just the data within your environment, but also your phone, your laptop. All of these things should be considered as components that you want to take into consideration. Fraud, and we talked about insurance fraud, well, not really insurance fraud, financial fraud associated with someone getting in your business and changing information there. Understanding all of these different attack vectors will help you to better create your plan, right? And I always tell people that each incident should have a solid response, right? You can go and start your plan by understanding if your ransomware is acceptable, or if theft is going to be there, or if fraud is there, and what are the procedures associated with all of those. That's your eventuality in building this program, being able to identify, even based on every new incident that you get, what's your first steps.
So let's try this instead. I'm going to give you some of the incidents, and if, let's say in a sentence or two, give me what the impact would be to the business from a technical and legal perspective. So theft, damage, or unauthorized access, e.g. someone steals documents from a person's desk.
So probably wanting to know, in a lot of these, from a legal perspective, we'll want to know what information was involved, like data elements, if it's hard data, or if it's, again, social security number is the one that often comes to mind because it's the most commonly understood to be like relatively sensitive, right? So, but whether it's if it's a business that's regulated by HIPAA, okay, is it a record? If we're talking about financial services, are we talking about a list of customers? Are we just talking about some notes? Interested there? Who's the threat actor? Who's the criminal in this case? Are they internal? Are they external? We do see relatively commonly internal incidents where it's an aggrieved employee or somebody making a bad decision, and how we proceed with that might change the incident response. And so incorporating that without going through the whole thing for one sentence, that the internal versus external is one piece to think about.
Just get his mic for a second. All right, Kevin, I'm gonna give you, employee tricked into allowing an attacker remote access to their computer.
From a security standpoint, you always worry about access control. What does that employee have access to within your environment, and what can they do with that access? Can they get into, sensitive information? Can they potentially exfiltrate financial data or customer data? Understanding how far their reach is the first and foremost step. You also have considerations around employee or HR considerations. How can you communicate not only to that employee about what happened, but also understanding, did they do it on purpose, on accident? Are they still liable? Because that doesn't always release that responsibility on that employee. And your procedures on handling that from an HR perspective can open up other legal, issues. If it's HIPAA related, then you got to also have the sanction policy. There has to be something done, and you have to document what happened and how that goes. So.
Taylor, I'm gonna give you an absolute terrible one. Employee has access to data they're not supposed to have access to, essentially, and you have evidence that they've been accessing it, whether it's HR data on their coworkers or business data.
Yeah, that's a sticky situation, right? I mean, the obvious initial sort of reaction here is that employee is probably going to need some amount of repercussion. Sounds, depending on the nature of it, I mean, if it's relatively harmless, there are worlds where that scenario is not as bad as it potentially sounds, although that's pretty, it's often pretty bad. Could be like a workaround, like I needed this for a business reason and my boss or whoever told me to go get it and I just couldn't find it, so I went into this folder and there was just a world of information available to me. If that's the case, then this is really, we need to do a better job of limiting access and confirming our access controls. To the extent that there was like a nefarious purpose involved, we really need to talk about what information coming back to what information are we talking about, who is it going to impact? Again, is it employee records? Why would this person be accessing records of every employee's, again, social security numbers or tax information, whatever it is? And if it's particularly sensitive and problematic, that's going to probably dictate the direction we need to go with this, and maybe think about some serious, relatively stronger response to that employee, just to ensure that all of our other employees or all of our customers whose information was improperly accessed or without authorization can then rest assured if this either needs to be disclosed to them because there's a law or a contract that says so, or if not, then if this ever does become public for one reason or another, we want to be able to say, like, we took the right steps to protect this and to do the right thing and make sure everybody's okay.
So I'm gonna make it even harder for the last one that everyone might actually be familiar with. Yeah. I'll ask both of you with this one though. Alright, so it's a couple days before the last payroll before Christmas, and as a payroll processing organization, I find out that a threat actor has been in our systems for the last few months. We have now lost access to them.
So, my reaction is, this isn't ransomware, but this is analogous to ransomware in the sense that always priority number one, even though, I'm thinking of this through the legal lens, still priority number one is now we have a business critical function that is down and inoperable. There are very serious additional steps that need to be taken to make sure that if that person who had access was able to access personal information or other sensitive information, bank account numbers, for example, and other means of accessing financial accounts, we need to make sure that we take the right steps, notification and remediation and all that. But the big thing is, of course, we can't pay our employees, and so, getting that back online is going to be obviously the most critical immediate reaction. And from an incident response plan perspective, knowing who to immediately call is, in this case, going to be like the most critical piece. Like, not allowing the employee who is at the front of this the comfort of being able to follow a plan is so crucial here to avoid delay of like, oh my gosh, what do we do? I think this is what we want to do. Like, I'll take these steps. Am I going to get in trouble for this? A lot of time can be wasted if we're not just kind of executing the plan and knowing that that's the expectation. And so to bring this back to the incident response plan, like that's just such a crucial and critical and helpful piece of this.
Absolutely agree. Communication is a very powerful tool in an incident response plan, right? Knowing who needs to be called first and foremost to get the understanding for what did they have access to, what information may they have exfiltrated, how did our system get locked up, how long has it been going on, so I know if I need to go way back 2 months ago to restore from a known good, or if I'm completely messed over, right? I just have to scrap the entire system and start from scratch. Part of your incident response should also deal with your business continuity planning or emergency COO, from some continuity of operations, I'm sorry. But having that in place so you know, which I did have a vendor that had to go through that recently where they couldn't pay or get paid from their vendors, millions of dollars they were holding. And we discussed, what's our continuity plan? We found out that there was a manual process.